Alright, so here's part 1 of level 3. We're very familiar with sine, cosine, and tangent, but there are 3 other trig functions that go along with those. So we know sine, okay, it says y over h, and we're used to seeing this as o over h, and here's why we can say y over h on the coordinate plane. So if I have on the coordinate plane, and say I draw a triangle in the second quadrant. So here's my reference angle. Now from here we would say, okay, here's the adjacent, here's the opposite, and here's the hypotenuse. Well, the opposite side is really how high this goes on the y-axis. So instead of saying O, we're going to try and get in the habit of saying y instead of O, because this is going to help us when we get further into the unit circle of understanding that y pairs with sine. Okay, now this next one, cosecant. Cosecant is just the reciprocal of sine. So it's 1 over sine, or if sine is y over h, you can think of cosecant as h over y. So you just have to remember that sine and cosecant go together. Cosine, we're very used to saying a over h, adjacent over hypotenuse. But again, say I have a triangle on the coordinate plane, let's put it in the third quadrant now. Okay, we would say the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Well, the adjacent side is really the x coordinate. So we're just going to get in the habit of saying x over h, because again, that's going to help us when it comes time to the unit circle. Okay, so just like sine has a reciprocal function, cosine also has a reciprocal. So instead of, you can think about it as 1 over cosine, or you can just flip the h over the x. Okay, and that's how you find secant. And the last one is tangent and cotangent. So tangent, this might look a little funny, but tangent we're used to saying is O over A. Okay, well O, the opposite side from theta, is the y. Okay, and that pairs with sine. And then the adjacent side pairs with the x. So for tangent, we're going to talk about the y over x. And then very similarly to the other ones, cotangent will be the reciprocal of that. So x over y. Now I'm hoping this is going to make sense to you when we do a couple problems. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the first one, and I want you to do the second one. Okay, so here I'm in quadrant 2. The x-coordinate is -3. The y-coordinate is 4. So that means I need to do the Pythagorean theorem to find out the hypotenuse. And because I'm squaring a negative, this actually becomes positive. So C is going to equal 5. Okay, so now I'm going to do sine, cosine, and tangent. And I will always usually start with these 3 and then just flip the second ones. So sine of theta is y over h. So that equals 4, the y-coordinate over the hypotenuse. Cosine of theta is x over h. And the x is -3, and the hypotenuse is 5. And tangent of theta is y over x, and y is 4, and x is -3. Okay, so those are very similar, very familiar to us. So now I'm going to do cosecant. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So I'm just going to take what I found from sine and flip it. Okay, same thing with cosine. Its reciprocal is secant, so I'm going to take that and flip it. And same thing with cotangent. I'm going to take what I found in tangent and just flip it. Okay. Why don't you try B and then press play to check your answers. Now before you keep going, I want you to check your sine, cosine, and tangents. So I went ahead and found the hypotenuse, and then I found the ratios. So sine, and it reduced to -1 over root 5. Cosine is 2 over root 5, and then tangent reduced to -1 over 2. You just have to be careful with these, and you can't have a root in the denominator. So I would multiply both top and bottom by that root, and you'd be left with -√5 over 5 for sine, and then for cosine it'd be 2√5 over 5, and then tangent just stays the same. So those are your first three. Now I'm going to give you a little hint and help you with the next three. So cosecant of theta matches with sine. So with sine, I usually look at what I found to be my answer before I had to rationalize it, before I multiplied by the roots. So that would be negative 1 over root 5, and I'm going to flip that. The reason for this is because if I flip my final answer of negative root 5 over 5, I'm going to get 5 over negative root 5, and I would have to rationalize again. So I want to refrain from doing more work than I have to, and just take the step before I simplified to use it for the reciprocal functions. So same thing for secant. Instead of taking 2 root 5 over 5, I'm going to take 2 over root 5 and just flip that to say root 5 over 2. And then cotangent is pretty simple. Cotangent was negative 1 over 2, and now this is just going to be negative 2 over 1, or just negative 2. Okay, so that's part 1 of level 3s. Go ahead and practice those. I think they're the first 3 questions on your practice, and then go to part 2 of level 3s.